being human is a little bit different than being a plant or an animal. A plant or an animal, for instance, the life of a plant or an animal includes acting to gain certain values. In the plant's case, it might be growing roots in order to extract water and minerals from the soil, growing taller in order to capture sunlight with leaves that may have been shaded by other plants or rocks. So the plant or the animal has within it the potential to further its own life without the use of abstract principles or logic. Humans are different, and we may require implementing some logic and some principles in order to live well and flourish as the kind of creature that we are. Okay? Again, a spider might be an animal that needs a web to do really well in the world. Well, it just so happens that spiders come with an ability to spin and weave webs that work. A beaver may be an animal that would do really, really well if it could have a dam built. And it just so happens, it turns out that beavers are good dam builders, and they know not only what kind of dam to build, but when is the right time to build it. I use the word know there with scare quotes because they don't need to really know it. It's kind of automatic for animals. For humans, it's not automatic. We actually have to learn what kinds of things to build and when in order to live a flourishing human life. This means that we have to organize our life around some principles. And I'm going to try to introduce in a short video some basic principles in a hierarchy that lead to other principles. And well, let me just go ahead and start, and we'll maybe follow up at the end. Okay, 3 principles you can start with are axioms. This would be part of the metaphysics section of philosophy. Metaphysics says, what is true? What is true of, say, reality? Metaphysics answers the question of what is. It asks and tries to answer the question of what really is. What is it like to be? That's metaphysics. So it turns out we've got 3 statements here we can look at. This first one here says existence exists. Now you could argue, no it doesn't. You could say existence doesn't exist, and I would ask you at that time, what do you mean by existence? And then you would say, well, all this stuff. And I would say, you mean the existence. So you have to point to existence to refer me to what that thing is that you say doesn't exist. You have to point to it ostensibly. So you're using existence to try to disprove it, and you've just negated yourself. So by that process, it's called reductio ad absurdum. We can see that existence exists is true. It cannot be disproven. It is impossible for it to be false. Okay? And then existence is identity. That means to be is to be something. That means every existence is an existence of a something. For instance, the existence of a rock is rock existence. There is no such thing as raw existence without an identity. You certainly couldn't identify it. You couldn't identify it if there was, but okay. The third one, consciousness is identification. Let's say you want to argue against it. You say, hey, consciousness is not identification. In fact, I'm going to use my consciousness to identify the fact that consciousness is not identification. You can't get there. You can't negate it. In order to negate it, you'd have to say, I've identified a fact about reality, utilizing my consciousness, that consciousness is not identification. So you can't really, you have to accept these axioms, okay? Now, do these axioms lead to anything else? Like when you go ahead and just throw in a human creature, a creature that thinks and has a mind, okay? What happens when we throw in a human being into the picture and we look at these three axioms. Do they lead anywhere? You know, if we know that consciousness is identification of really existing things, then we're going to find out that reason is absolute. Reason, the raw material of reason is the evidence of the senses. That's not on here. They're taken as self-evident. The sense perception is another one. If you try to disprove it, you'll have to use it. You could say, hey, you know, I've looked in my microscopes and telescopes, and I've discovered that when we perceive things, they don't really exist. It's all a dream. And I've been able to exit the dream. This is where they, you know, to disprove sense perception, you have to say, hey, I've used my senses and they tell me this. Well, you basically have to use it to try to disprove it. So that, again, I could have written that in here. The validity of sense perception. It's kind of axiomatic, okay? How about this next proposition, or organizing principle of your life, that reason is absolute? What does it mean? Does it mean that you can reason your way out of a traffic ticket? Not necessarily. When I say absolute, I don't mean all-powerful, you know, omniscient. But when I say absolute, I mean, let's say you had two courses of action. You could, number one, you could follow some gut feelings, and then an alternative course of action is to follow reason. Okay, let's say, for instance, you were at a zoo and you had a gut feeling that if you jumped in the lion's den, that the lions would come up and they would kind of snuggle around you, and you could pet the lions, you know, and play ball with the lions. If you had that gut feeling, you might jump into the lion's den. But it's probably better to follow reason in such a case. And in such a case, you would say a lion is an animal essentially naturally programmed to kill flesh, to kill other animals made of flesh, when it's hungry at least. And so it's programmed to be a killer. Maybe I won't mess with it and try to pet it. Okay, so that's an example of using reason instead of another, like gut feelings, or you could say, or faith. You could have faith in something, but when feelings or faith conflict with reason, it's probably better for you to follow reason as the absolute or the predominant decision maker of your life. So you'll get these chances where odd feelings will tell you to do something different, and at least in the long run, reason will win. Okay, why will it win? Because existence exists. Existence is identity, and consciousness is the identification of existence or of reality. So, but you know, with the example of the lion, we know it exists and that it means something. It has lion existence. And through our consciousness, we can discover how it is that lions go about existing, and they stay on this earth because they eat flesh. Okay, that's where, so we use reason to discover it's not a good choice of action or value to go ahead and jump in and try to pet the lions. Okay, so this, once you enter a human into the picture here, and humans have their own identity. Okay, we think a lot. And that helps us survive in a world where we could not otherwise survive in, because we are not strong enough to compete with lions, at least with our bare hands. Okay, and does reason is absolute? Does that lead to anything? Turns out reason is man's means of survival. Again, I said man does not have the physical capacity to compete with predators in a jungle, but he has a mental capacity that supersedes all other animals, and therefore he can plan long range, he can make tools. So with a mediocre, middle of the road physical capacity, we can eventually survive and even thrive. Why? Because we have a brain, a mind, let's say it that way. Animals have brains, though they don't necessarily have minds. I know I'm going to make some people mad when I say that. Okay, so our means of survival is reason why. Well, in the naturalistic, natural selection evolutionary perspective, man has to have reason to survive. We couldn't have made it without it. So you can go backward in time and say, well, there's only one way we could have done it, is by using reason, or getting really, really lucky for thousands and thousands of generations. Okay, anyway, let's not get into flights of fancy. So reason is our means of survival. Does that lead to anything? Okay, man's life is his moral standard. Where the heck did that come from? Okay, a moral standard is something you can judge your actions by. Okay, there'll be alternatives. Like some alternatives would be, well, if it pleases God, then it's a good action. Then we run into this problem. Who speaks for God? There are at least 400 different religions in the world and maybe 400,000 different interpretations. So it can be tough sometimes to use God as the moral standard. Now, there'll be a lot of people doing it, and hopefully there'll be enough mixture of reason in with their faith where they won't create too much havoc. But as I said before, when reason and faith or feelings conflict, don't jump into the lion's den. Let's just say that. Okay. So how do we use reason to determine man's life is his moral standard? Life is basically the acquirement of values. It's self-sustaining. Like I said, a spider will build its own web to sustain itself. A man may need to build virtues to sustain himself. Okay. For instance, let me give you an example of this so that it's a little bit more clear. Let's say you wanted to be dishonest in your life. You thought, well, sometimes when you're dishonest, you can get a lot of value really quickly, and you want to, like you can con people out of money. Okay, so you try it. You go out in the world and you're like, I'm going to go and con people out of stuff. That's my job. That's what I'm going to do. I've accepted that as the organizing principle of my life. How's that going to work out for me? Okay, the very first time I try it, I might actually get a success. Now, I might feel bad, though. I might go to bed that night saying, wow, I don't feel very good because I just cheated an old lady out of all of her retirement. Or whatever. And chances are somebody's going to learn that what you did. Let's say the old woman had a daughter and a son and a sister, and turns out they figured out that she got cheated by you. So now you've got to move, if you're in a small town at least. You can't stay there. There'll be ramifications for your behavior. You tried to be dishonest and get value, and you ended up with less value than when you started. Again, all the possessions that you got from her may be lost in court, and you can be imprisoned. So just by trying to be dishonest, originally you thought, well, this might be a good thing to do. But if you think about it really deeply, and you don't negate or evade aspects of human nature, it turns out honesty is a good thing to do, to practice in your life. It's a good principle to follow. Another thing of someone practicing dishonesty will get in their life is they'll become alone because people will learn not to trust them. So here you got this person who had originally started with a little bit of value that they grabbed from somebody else. But then for the rest of their life, they could be in prison. And at the end of their life, you could ask them, hey, do you wish maybe that you had habitually chosen honesty as a virtue? They'd probably say, yeah, they would say, I just didn't realize that there are some things you need to do to be a flourishing human being. And I wasn't open to that. So life, that's how we can look at life as man's life is this moral standard. You're going to live it. You're going to be stuck with the choices that you make, right? So if you using the honesty example, you can see how the man's life, whether his life was a success or not, whether he thrived or not, whether he flourished or not, determined whether his actions were moral or not. Okay? So using that as a standard, we can get to virtue-based value seeking. Okay? We seek values. All life has to. Like I said, a plant has to get sunlight and water and minerals from the soil. Animals have to, build things sometimes or eat things, hunt. Lions have to hunt. You got to get that value. With humans, we get value, and it matters the way you get the value matters. Like I said with the dishonesty example, you could get some values, some short-lived values pretty quickly by being dishonest, but what you're doing is condemning yourself to a dismal life of loneliness and despair. Okay, not too fun. Okay, it's better to just build your character up and build some virtue. Okay, let's say that everybody was like that values mattered and virtues mattered for everyone. Like let's say they're all human and they all have human nature. Okay, if that's true, what do we get? A harmony of interests. Now, in the jungle, you don't always have a harmony of interests. Like when you look at cross species, like lions and gazelle. Okay, so a lion looks at a gazelle as food, predatory manner, and sometimes humans look at other humans in a predatory manner, and but we can see by backtracking through the concepts here in the chart that they're not being good humans, and that they won't have, in general, they won't have success doing that, and they won't necessarily sleep well at night unless they, that odd 1 in a million person who has a neurological disorder that's off the charts. Okay, so normally there's a harmony of interests among rational people. This means that humans actually do better when they work together, and all economic growth, from Adam Smith to today, is a material witness or a material proof of that. That if we allow ourselves to trade with one another, things get better. We have a harmony of interests in that if we divide up our labor, and if you have to sow your own field and harvest your own wheat and all that, you have a pretty decent life, maybe. Hopefully there's no drought. Hopefully you have some spare time to spend with your kids, stuff like that. But if we get separated out, where some people to grand commercial farming, that'll free up all this other time for other people to engage in things they like to do. And people could take up art. They could do hobbies. They could do what they want. They could learn philosophy. They could create computer programs. If you allow people to divide labor and trade with one another to mutual consent, to mutual benefit, there's no end. Life can just keep getting better and better, unless you throw in a wrong philosophy that can muck it all up. But anyway, so looking at these basic philosophical principles of life being virtue-based, value-seeking. For humans, it has to be virtue-based. For animals, it's automatic. And then the life of humans, including a harmony of interests, where humans do better cooperating. The honesty example showed that if you don't cooperate with others, if you defect against them, if you lose trustworthiness, if you lose that, you're reducing the absolute height you can gain in your life. Okay, it's just shooting yourself in the foot. Okay, and then the last concept here is that rights are absolute. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean I have the right to a mansion? No, I don't have a right to a palace or a mansion. But what I do have a right to is to use my means of survival to survive. Let's say you didn't. What would a human life be like if you didn't have the right to think freely and to act on your thoughts? Let's take the farmer growing the wheat. Okay, he sees his wheat turning kind of brown, and he thinks, oh, I'm going to water this, because water might change things, and my wheat might sprout better if I make sure there's enough water. But then somebody says, no, I'm not going to let you act on your thoughts. I'm not going to allow you to think freely and act on your thoughts. What would happen then? Well, if the guy doesn't water wheat, there might be no wheat to eat, and then he dies. So you can't have a human kind of existence without rights. The human kind of existence is that kind of existence that thinks, that involves a thought process, a discovery of what things are valuable in order to implement those in your life. So without that discovery process, if you use initiated force as a means for dealing with other human beings, these are other individuals just like yourself that require that means of survival was reason and the ability to think and act on the thought in order to better your life. So you can't have that. It contradicts human life to try to live without individual rights. I guess that'll conclude this video for now. Thank you.